Perhaps this morning you are in the mood for a love story. After so many days, weeks of relentless, grim news from Gaza, news from Ukraine, Earth Day reminders of our failure to cut carbon emissions and protect our oceans from plastic. Perhaps you find yourself here this morning in search of some relief. Desperate as I seem to be lately for good news. T.S. Eliot says in his opening lines to his epic poem, The Waste Land, April is the cruelest month. But this morning, along the road which runs from Jerusalem to Gaza, we don't know the spot where they met. We only know that today it is under surveillance, likely cratered, a place of grief, a road that separates rather than connects. This morning, along the road which runs from Jerusalem to Gaza, we encounter the Apostle Philip and this splendid and mysterious eunuch from Ethiopia. The Spirit says to Philip, go over to this chariot and join it. That's our invitation this morning, to go over to this chariot and join it. And the love story is the story of God's love for us. Now, if we are traveling with Philip, what do we encounter on the Gaza Road? The evangelist Luke, who wrote the book of Acts as well as his own gospel, is by far the best storyteller of the four evangelists. But he doesn't quite give us all the detail we need to envision this scene. We are told that the eunuch is a trusted court official from Ethiopia on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. We can safely assume that he is not driving his own chariot because he's reading. But he is with a considerable entourage of porters and drivers. He is, after all, in charge of the Ethiopian queen's treasury, sort of the Jerome Powell of his own time and place. More importantly, just as in Luke's story of the Good Samaritan and the wounded traveler, the story of Philip and the eunuch is a story of cultural boundaries being ignored and transgressed. Jews had nothing to do with Samaritans. An Ethiopian eunuch, despite his entourage, despite his splendor, is even more of an outsider in this time and place. He's of a different race. His ambiguous sexual identity also marks him as an alien to be avoided. And to Philip, in sight of this stranger, the Spirit says, go over to this chariot and join it. Now, what happens in and around this chariot is fascinating to me because it feels like healthy church. We have outreach ministry in Philip's very approach to the other, in their immediate rapport, in their evident feeling of safety in each other's company. We have Bible study and Christian formation. Isaiah 53 in this instance. They're just like our Glimpse of the Gospel group, which meets every Sunday morning. And finally, we have liturgy. They encounter some body of water. What is to prevent me from being baptized? Says the eunuch. Philip doesn't answer with words. He doesn't say, fill out this form and email it back to my office. He doesn't say our next scheduled baptism is on All Saints Sunday. Take a seat. There is no examination of the candidate that Luke bothers to tell us about. The church isn't yet that complicated. They went down to the water, we are told, and Philip baptizes him. Then, bang! Philip gets whisked away to his next assignment. And the eunuch, we are told, goes on his way rejoicing. Rejoicing. I think we should be rejoicing this morning because there's so much good news in this short story for us. And the good news, the Easter good news, goes something like this. What is to prevent me from being baptized? Asks the eunuch. The answer to him, to any of us, is nothing. The good news of Jesus, this big new idea abroad in the world that Philip is proclaiming, is that the value of humans, God's love for us, has nothing at all to do with their usefulness or even their virtue. Philip answers the eunuch's question by baptizing him on the spot, as if to say, I don't know you, but I do know that nothing can separate any of us from the love of God. Nothing can separate any of us from the love of God. This is the message of the Easter season, isn't it? That it's not about your usefulness, that it's not about what you have done or left undone. God loves you, period. Full stop. Now, this may seem cliched to you, this Easter message. But if you begin to sit with it, begin to think about how you yourself assign or withhold value and regard, you can begin to see how radically countercultural this message remains. Some years ago, then British Prime Minister David Cameron, in his own Easter message to the nation, told his electorate that the message of Easter, quote, involves hard work and responsibility. Hard work and responsibility. To which the Guardian newspaper had this to say. I'd like to quote what the Guardian said at some length for you this morning. What Christianity brought into the world, said the Guardian, at Easter, wasn't compassion, kindness, decency, hard work, or any of the other respectable virtues, real or necessary though they are. It was the extraordinary idea that people have worth in themselves, regardless of their usefulness to others, regardless even of their moral qualities. This is what is meant by the Christian talk of being saved by grace rather than works, and by the Christian assertion that God loves everyone. The Guardian continues, the malformed, the poor, the disabled, and even the foreigner. Go over to that chariot and join it, said the Spirit to Philip. Here's what the Guardian concludes in its response to the Prime Minister's Easter call to hard work and responsibility. The idea that humans are valuable just for being human is, many would say, absurd. We assert it in the face of all the facts of history, and arguably even of biology. This idea entered the world with Christianity and scandalized both Romans and Greeks. But it is now the common currency of Western humanism and of human rights. Absurd, this good news. Scandalous that we cannot strive our way into grace. What is to prevent me from being baptized, says the eunuch. Philip has no reply but the cool water in his own cupped hand. And the eunuch goes on his way rejoicing. We know nothing of the eunuch's past. We don't need to, is Luke's implication. The eunuch has been recognized as the first LGBTQ Christian. The eunuch has been claimed, along with Simon of Cyrene, as one of the first Christians from Africa, one of the first Christians with black skin. These are important ideas, I think. But they are not the central idea this morning. The most important idea is that he is beloved of God because he is human. He is human. He is beloved of God. And so are you. And so am I. So, what's next for us? Philip gets spirited away to his next assignment. The chariot rolls out of our own view, and we find ourselves alone on the Gaza road, perhaps choking on the dust those fancy wheels have kicked up. Perhaps thinking of those promises made once on our behalf, or promises we have heard recently in church about the breaking of bread and of the prayers, about the dignity of every human person. Forgiven, loved, and free, as no less than the Guardian newspaper, we are reminded, as God's own. What do we do next? Is such grace simply licensed to do as we please with the knowledge of impunity? We're still getting in? Or does grace lead us into a new way of living and of seeing? Perhaps grace is this: room to grow. Forgiven, loved, and free, with room to grow more and more into the image of that God who is love. Grace as room to grow, to bear the fruit that John speaks of in the gospel this morning. You know, I spoke a few moments ago of the meeting of Philip and the eunuch as church, as a model of church, Bible study, fellowship, a liturgical act, room to grow. Without worship, you will shrink. It's as brutal as that. Without worship, you will shrink. It's as brutal as that. Those words belong to child psychiatrist Martin Dysart. Dysart is the first character introduced in Peter Schaeffer's play, Equus. And he's the last to speak at the play's end. If you don't worship, you will shrink. It's as brutal as that. Dysart is a middle-aged man who has enjoyed some success in his career, but he worries that he's robbing his patients of the things that make them unique. His lifeless marriage and respectable profession clash with his secret dream of running away to the Mediterranean coast. Dysart feels that his life is dwindling, and he second guesses everything he does. He's living in a kind of hell. Hardly a mouthpiece for Christianity, but Dysart's insight into worship is stunning to me. Without worship, you will shrink. It's as brutal as that. Then the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over to this chariot and join it." What the Spirit is saying to Philip is, do not shrink. This eunuch, oh, how I wish we knew his name. Reading aloud, as reading was done in the ancient world, almost always aloud, this eunuch is seeking his own growth, and he can't get anywhere further on his own. Vine and branch go over to this chariot and join it. We meet strangers sitting in their chariots every day. We meet them in our daily life and work. We meet them here at church. What happens next between Philip and the eunuch is so instructive to me. They extend hospitality to each other. Philip speaks at some length, but only after the eunuch has asked him to. At the heart of their time together is deep humility and persisting curiosity about the other. 4 questions in this short meeting. Do you understand what you are reading? How can I unless someone guides me? About whom, may I ask, does the prophet say this? About himself or someone else? What is to prevent me from being baptized? 4 questions in such a short story. It's clear that these are not 2 people whose growth is limited by assumptions about the other. One could say that curiosity about the stranger leads them into grace. Their encounter is worship because it is an encounter that enlarges them. Go over to this chariot and join it. What if we were to think of church in part as a safe place to be curious about the strangers in our midst? Part of that idea was at the heart of Invite, Welcome, Connect, a book a number of us took up last year. A book that encourages curiosity. What brought you here? What brought you here? That's an example of a question that may at first seem like the rudest possible thing to say to another, especially someone you don't yet know. But oh, what an enlarging question. What doors might it unlock? So much love and wisdom and grace waiting to be surfaced, waiting to be clasped in the responding narratives. Maybe Edgar Allan Poe once put it best. These are words I scrawled in a notebook when I was 15. I think I've been waiting since then to use them. Proprieties of place, wrote Poe. Proprieties of place, and especially of time, are the bugbears which terrify mankind from the contemplation of the magnificent. Propriety. When the Spirit tells Philip to approach the chariot, it's about the good news, ignoring propriety. It's God's transgressive love. Where are you from? What brought you here? I wonder what chariots you will approach this morning at coffee hour or elsewhere in the week to come. May our curiosity and our encounters enlarge our spirits and shape us more and more in the image of a God who is love.